Okay, here's the central mystery. It's so weird, right? Let's say you have a workplace with overworked, stressed, burdened workers, and they're complaining, they're burning out, they're not happy at work, and then you send them on a yoga class or you give them like mindfulness training, and somehow it still doesn't work. I mean,
No.
how weird is that? So here's my question. What is wrong with those ungrateful bastards? Why doesn't it?
Right?
I I may be caricaturing the situation here a little bit, but it does seem, Louise, it just seems to me like a lot of workplaces, that's where they start, right? They can tell that their employees are not happy and engaged and motivated. But the starting point for a lot of do you see that too? That the
Yeah.
starting point is that like yoga classes, mindfulness, that kind of thing.
Well, it's the employee themselves. So we make this assumption that it's got to be them because we're paying them, right?
Hmm.
What's the problem?
Exactly.
So, like, come on. Yeah. So people, organizations often start at the bottom, thinking if we just fix these people, ta-da, we fixed everything and it's all good. Versus, which I'm assuming we're going to talk about later, starting at the top.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Exactly. So and the cool new thing is that there's now a new study out on this type of intervention. When you try to fix the individual, does that work or does that not? We're going to talk about that study because it's absolutely fascinating.
Yeah.
Before we do, Louise, could you introduce yourself? Tell us who you are.
Absolutely. So, my name is Louise Lambert. I live here in Dubai. I've been here since 2003, and I do a lot of work in and research in positive psychology, those individual level interventions. uh, and I also have taught at university for a while, and now I'm doing consulting in organizations on exactly this question.
Yes, exactly. And for those who might not know, I'm Alexander Kjov. I'm a speaker and consultant on workplace happiness. So also this field. Cool. Let's start with the study. Like the
Mhm.
main message. What is the bottom line here? What does it say?
Individual level interventions don't work. The study was really clear. In fact, I think one of the sentences was, "This does not work. Stop it."
Yeah,
It was pretty
uh,
blunt.
it is pretty blunt. Does that would you does that match what you see in the world?
Y- Yes and no. And I'll talk about that in a moment. So, let's look at the nuts and bolts of what happened in this study.
Yeah.
The study was done by William Fleming, and it was published literally just like 2-3 weeks ago in January, published by the Wellbeing Research Center from the University of Oxford. So, not some fly by night. The study
Sounds
was
familiar.
solid.
Yeah.
And what they did is they looked at 46,336 employees, so a huge sample size across 233 organizations in the UK. Now, keep in mind, in the UK, I have something to say about that. So it could be just that they're miserable, but well, that's another question. So what
Uh,
William did is he took data from an organization, Britain's Healthiest Workplace.
mhm.
So this is an organization, and there are many in many different countries that participating organizations can sort of model best practices, but also collect data at the same time. So this organization collects data from employees on physical well-being, mental well-being, also their perceptions of the organization and whether or not they have participated in any of the interventions that organizations would have used in whatever given year.
Right.
Managers, HR leaders also provide data on what interventions, initiatives, what different things that they're doing in the organization, as well as any policy changes. So basically, what's going on at their side.
Mhm.
Um, and then what he did is use that data, and that data is collected from employees, whether they participate or not. Which makes
Right.
a beautiful sample because what it means is you've got some people who are doing the interventions, others who are like, yeah, no thanks, and are not doing anything, and then basically comparing which group has the highest well being.
Beautiful.
So it should go without saying that if you are in the participating group and you're taking part in all of these different interventions, which we'll look at in a minute,
Hmm.
you should have higher well-being. But what he actually found is that group A participating, group B not participating, da 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 da, same. How disappointing.
That is kind of interesting, and a little sad, and a little
And
sad.
a little sad.
Yeah,
Actually, a lot sad.
it's
And
actually a lot sad.
a lot sad because so much money gets spent on these programs.
Yes.
And when you look at the outcome, you're like, yeah, should have just
Yeah.
given everybody the afternoon off.
That might have helped more though.
That
That might
probably would have
actually
helped
did they
more.
did they test that intervention?
No, they
They
didn't,
did
but they
not.
should have. But
They
they should
should have.
have.
Yeah. But for me, it is the central tragedy of this whole space is that
Yeah.
I do think that a lot of workplaces are waking up to this, right?
Yeah.
They're like, yes, employee mental health, employee happiness matters. They know that. It's just that then they spend all of their time and money and effort on this kind of stuff that just does not work. And of course, that's wasted time and money, but it's also time that then is not spent doing the stuff that actually could work, which we're going to talk about in a second.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think so I think you're right. There's a lot of organizations that are really recognizing that when people are well, they do well.
Yeah.
It's not hard to wrap their heads around. And I think it's this realization as well that and maybe that's where a lot of these individual level interventions come from, is that work is demanding
Hmm.
and workers need resources to meet those demands. It's how do we do that, becomes the question.
Yes. So I'm not a researcher, but you are. So you trust this study? How good is it? How would you rate the quality of this, the whole setup?
It's super good.
Awesome.
Yeah. So I'm like, oh, he nailed it. He nailed it in like 10 different directions. I'm like, I can't even argue with it. Like, mm. Yeah, no, it's very good. It's super high quality. And he also looked at a
I
number
love
of
that.
different hypotheses and was also open to the fact that he could be wrong and that maybe, the influence goes in opposite directions. Looking at, did it make a difference if people were happier already beforehand, were more stressed beforehand, asked all of the right questions. And still the answer is no, no, no.
That's amazing. Just one note, if anybody's interested, the data is from 2017 and 18, so that's pre-COVID.
Yeah,
Um, so that is not a factor here. That's not
no.
something we need to consider when looking at this. Um, what does the study not say? For instance, for me personally, like I was thinking, if somebody wants to do like mindfulness and they find that helps them, the study doesn't say it won't help you as an individual. I
Right.
guess, right?
So let's maybe think about what do we mean by individual level
Yeah.
interventions versus group level interventions?
Hmm.
Individual level interventions are things that will help you as an individual in how you approach work, your emotional state, and or existing stressors in your life that could free up energy for you to then be well at work.
Right.
So, examples of this could be things that are totally unrelated to work, like financial well being programs. It could also include well-being apps.
Hmm.
It could also include attention to sleep.
Hmm.
So there's a lot of sleep experts, sleep talks, sleep webinars. It could also include stress management training, time management training, personal coaching. This is
Right.
really popular now, where almost every employee in big organizations has access to personal coaching or career coaching, health coaching, all sorts of stuff.
Hmm.
Things like mindfulness, as you mentioned. So, again, anything that targets the individual.
Yeah. I think they in this study they look specifically like mental health and not physical health so much. I think they wrote
Yes, correct.
in
So
one
they
paragraph.
they
Yeah.
didn't look at the physical
Not
piece,
like yeah.
and we can contrast that with organizational interventions.
Hmm.
These are not focused on the employee, but focus more on things that affect the employee. So
Right.
things like workload, things like training managers to be Nice.
Mhm.
Kind and supportive. Um, Things like policies, so no emails after 5 o'clock unless it's like some drastic emergency.
Yeah,
No pulling people in on weekends or evenings because somebody's got a great idea.
yeah,
So on the one side, the organizational stuff reduces those stressors. The individual level stuff uh, basically hands the responsibility to individuals to do for themselves.
yeah. And that's what they looked at. So those were the interventions they looked at was stuff like that, the
Yes.
individual stuff. And what
Yeah.
outcomes did they look at in the how do they measure the effectiveness?
Yeah. So what they then measured, so again, using data that was already collected, so that was easy. They already had that information. Using mental health scale, so
Mhm.
specifically the Warwick Edinburgh Mental Well-being Scale.
Oh,
Got
that
all these
one, yeah,
fancy names.
that's a good
Yeah,
one.
yeah, that one. You know that one.
I like it.
So basically, measuring how well people are. The Kessler Psychological Distress Scale, measuring how unwell people are. So depression,
Another classic,
anxiety,
yeah. Yeah,
exactly.
good one.
Engagement scale, life satisfaction, work satisfaction, but also asking agreement with certain statements about how people perceive the organization. So
Mhm.
did they perceive that managers supported them, that the
Right.
organization cares about their mental health and well-being? Did they feel that they belong to the organization? So a lot of that sort of qualitative data as well. And
Right.
then, of course, did they participate? Yes or no? In what interventions?
Right. What a fascinating study design. I'm so happy we have this kind of data.
Yeah,
It just
it's good.
yeah, yeah. And so and like you said, the main conclusion is no, does not work.
Nope.
Basically none of this works.
Yeah, no. So they found a few interesting things. So basically, largely no. So
Yeah.
no difference for relaxation, time management, coaching, well-being apps, financial well-being, la 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 la.
Mhm.
They did find worse outcomes. So for three things will actually make you more unhappy:
Oh man.
resilience and stress management,
Oh no.
mindfulness, and
Yeah.
time management. Now, this one was interesting because the thinking is, if you're already stressed out and you're having a hard time managing your time, and you have a huge workload, somebody pointing that out to you and basically
Mhm.
telling you what a failure you are because you can't do it right, it's just going to make you feel worse, right?
Yeah,
But also
yeah.
it makes you more aware of it, because now
Right.
you're like, oh my gosh, I can't do anything about this. I can't do anything about this. And these are all the things I'm supposed to do and I can't.
Mhm.
Well, now I'm really hooped. And actually, it actually made people feel worse.
Yeah.
So
Actually,
that was
sorry.
disappointing. Yeah.
Yeah, somebody actually told me that a lot of people who go to stress management training are actually more stressed after the training than they were before. And this would certainly seem to bear this
Yeah.
out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They would
So,
agree.
yeah. So, okay. So either the interventions don't work or some of them actually make things a little worse. Oh
Yes.
my God.
There was, however, one thing that showed little tiny outcomes:
Volunteering.
volunteering,
Volunteering.
which is kind of like, what? Because we never actually include volunteering on the list of well being interventions.
Yeah.
We don't think of that. We're like, well,
Yeah.
that's for other people.
Right.
And it turns out that when people volunteer, and this is borne out by data in other studies as well, but people who volunteer are generally a lot happier in life. It's a really super good distraction because you're not focusing on yourself. You're extending aid, assistance, or just doing something cool in
Hmm.
a completely different context outside of work, maybe something that matters to you. So maybe it's, I don't know, animal shelter, soup kitchen, whatever.
Yeah.
So meaning, purpose, but also a sense of belonging and
Hmm.
something bigger than you.
Yeah.
And it's something you get to do with colleagues, and it's not forced and contrived like that annual pizza party you're forced to go to every year that you hate going to. Right.
No, and there's an actual outcome from it. After you've done this, somebody's a little bit better off. If you go to a team offsite or a pizza party, nobody's better off after. It might have been a good experience while it lasted, but it has no impact
No
whatsoever.
long lasting. Yeah,
Whereas
exactly.
volunteering can have. I've seen a very practical example of this from at Zappos in Las Vegas, the online retailer, where they have at the HR department, they have an actual binder full of volunteering opportunities in
Oh,
Las Vegas.
nice.
And you can choose if you want to go, cook food at a soup kitchen, or clean up a local park, or work with the homeless, or whatever. Once a year, they have a day where they bring in all the homeless people from Vegas, and give them free shoes, because that's really good to have. It's a good pair of shoes when you're homeless.
And it's
And
something
you want,
that's
yeah,
real, and you see a tangible outcome, as you say, on somebody's life, and you're like, wow, you can't make that up. Like you
exactly.
saw that and you caused that.
Exactly. I that one jumped out at me, and the positive effects were in stuff like life happiness. It had a positive effect on people's life happiness. It didn't affect their like their sense of time pressure. I think, and why and again, why would it? Uh,
Yeah, it's not
yeah,
related, but it's a nice boost, and
yeah,
it seemed to be a bit of a lasting boost as well.
yes. So I think that definitely holds some pointers for organizations here, and I think there's some real potential in that kind of an intervention. Yes. Um, So why don't these types of interventions work? They oughta. Why don't they?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of reasons. So one, and the article did say this, and I think this is also what has caused so much controversy, is that many of these interventions do work in other contexts.
Hmm.
So we think of mindfulness or we think of positive psychology interventions. There is evidence for these. Uh,
Hmm.
the evidence, however, seems to come from clinical contexts or
Right.
context from community projects, for example, or maybe online studies, which are still valid, but it's people that sign up because they want to. Or if you're a client, you're going to a counseling center, you're paying for that. So you're
Hmm.
motivated, you want to do it, um, and there we do see efficacy. So I think for a lot of these interventions, the thinking is, well, if they work there, if we drop them into the workplace, they should work. And I think that's where things start to break down a little bit. So
Yeah.
in theory, yeah, it makes sense, right? Build people's resources, psychosocial resources, and they'll be better able to meet job demands.
Sure.
But one of two things is happening. Either these interventions just completely fail in workplaces, or the demands are such in workplaces that 15 minutes of gratitude is just no match
Yeah.
for a terrible manager and workload of 18 hours a day. Like, so one is just much bigger than the other.
Yeah.
So people's resources are just depleted off the start, and it's
Hmm.
actually not enough.
Yeah.
Now, in a way, that's actually a good finding, because what it says is sort of kicks the responsibility back to workplaces, saying all these resources we're giving people are still not enough for the
Yeah.
demands you're placing on them. So
Yeah.
that's kind of one positive I see come out of this.
Hmm.
Um, there is another way to think about this, and it's how are these interventions being implemented in workplaces? So I have found a beautiful study by Jessica Grossmeyer, published in 2020 in the American Journal of Health Promotion. And what she looked at is, again, using something similar to this Britain's Healthiest Workplace. In the US, there's something called the Hero program. So it's like a hero scorecard that organizations use, and it's very similar. Um, and she did a study with 812 organizations, looking at four different factors, basically asking what works.
Hmm.
Is it leadership support?
Yeah.
Is it having great programs?
Hmm.
Is it having programs that are integrated across levels with existing services, with referral ability? Or is it incentives, basically
Hmm.
giving people money or punishing them? And some organizations do that.
They do. They
and
do.
and looking at what makes the biggest difference to well-being outcomes, cost, and impact,
Hmm.
and attendance in these programs. And what she found, that across the board for everything, it's leadership support.
Yeah. Of course it is.
And leadership support is not always well understood. So organizations will often talk about, we need buy-in, but buy-in
Mhm.
is often limited to the guy at the top signing the check, then saying, okay, good, And that's kind of where it ends. So what Jessica's saying in her study is that leadership support goes way beyond that. It's
Mhm.
modeling well-being. It's attending the programs you're paying for.
Yeah.
It's asking people, hey, are you attending? How's it going? What'd you guys talk about this week? It's holding people accountable for what happens in terms of new behavioral practices, attitudes, building that into KPIs. So she talks about a whole range of leadership behaviors, and that's a big piece that's often missing to
Yeah.
help these programs come to life where they could be potentially useful. But we don't know because often leaders don't support them.
Yeah. A great example of that is a pension company here in Copenhagen, where they had a lot of these initiatives going on, but the CEO was completely behind it and always there. So if there was one of these events going on, he'd be there.
Yeah,
He'd follow up on how it worked. If there was an initiative where the middle managers needed to do something, he would follow up with them. Did you actually do it?
amazing.
So yes, he opened the checkbook and paid for these things, but he was also there, part of it, and modeling it. And by the way, just made me think one more aspect of management support, leadership support, is to not undermine it afterwards. I mean,
Yeah,
if on the one hand we're going to say yes, we care about our employees, here's a mindfulness program, then maybe let's not, abuse them, be rude to them, overload them with work, because it's very easy to, start these programs on the one hand, but then initiate management action that has the complete opposite effect.
yeah.
And that's bad. Yeah.
And I also think, just to answer to your question, like what why don't these things work? I also think timing sometimes is important,
Hmm.
and what goes first and what goes second. So again, often organizations start with employees, and then the top, well, if we ever get there, but often we just don't. um, but if we started by the top, then we could follow it up with employees and sort of top up
Yes.
with these psychosocial
Yes.
skills to complement that structural work which has already been done. So if we do both of them, I suspect we would get even nicer outcomes. But we start with the wrong one and then we just kind of stop.
Yeah. I have one more theory on why these kind of things don't work, and it is that if the workplace is not good, like if people are overworked, they're not treated well, they don't feel respected, and then management does this, it's seen as a slap in the face. Like employees can see all the problems they're facing, and they're like, can we please fix the problems? Um, and instead they get a pizza party or a mindfulness training, or here's an app, to register how unhappy and stressed you are because we're overworking you constantly. um, so there's no employee buy-in for any of these things. In fact,
Yeah.
it can undermine. Yeah, right.
Yes. Yeah. That's exactly what I was going to say. It's that it actually ruins the notion of well being, because now employees are looking at this going, oh, so this whole thing's actually a joke.
Yeah.
It's not a joke. It's
Yeah.
actually super important. And your quality of life rests on this, and how well you do at work rests on this. It's not a joke, but it's been kind of turned into one.
Yeah.
And it undermines any motivation for future initiatives as well. So suddenly, if you get it right at some point 2-3 years later and you want to try again, employees are like, yeah, no, we've been there, done
Yeah.
that. You're not
Exactly.
fooling me twice. Right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's like a intervention fatigue.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And also lack of credibility. It starts to lose its integrity, actually.
Yeah. Yeah. So given that these things don't work, and now we have data saying that they don't,
Mhm.
why are companies so in love with them? Why is this their go-to move?
They're easy. They're super
Easy, right?
easy, and
Yeah.
they're available,
Yeah.
right? They're super available. And but they don't meet the needs of what people need and want. And
No.
I'm always struck by this. I always want to say, but did you check with people? Like, is this really what they want? Because I know when I was very unhappy in my workplace, if somebody had said, what's one small thing we could do to help your experience? It would not have been An app? Like, I don't need an app. I need quiet. Tell everybody to shut up. Like,
Yes.
you put us on these little
Yes.
glass offices, open floor plan. Like, no, an app isn't going to help me, right? So I think sometimes, again, come back to this notion of money. Organizations spend a lot of money on these, where the solutions are actually a lot cheaper sometimes. If we just ask people, what do you like? What would help you? And
Mhm.
often what they say is just people to be nicer to me or just to notice. Well, great, because that doesn't even cost anything.
Yeah.
So we could do well-being a lot more cheaply, for one, but we could meet the needs of people much more effectively, by asking.
Yeah. So it
Yeah.
would be cheaper and it would actually work, right? We should probably do that. We should
Yeah.
get on that. Yeah. My other theory for why companies love this kind of thing, in addition to that it's easy, is that it's safe, right? It places the problem must be the employees, right?
Yeah.
If they're stressed, it's because they don't have the correct stress handling tools or capabilities or resources. So we can fix them. If they're stressed, it's definitely not because we in management are doing anything wrong, and we definitely don't want to open up that whole bag, um, and have to look inwards and have to work with ourselves and question some of our beliefs and practices,
Yeah.
because that would be a lot more challenging. Um,
And I think sometimes well-being becomes a nice distraction.
yeah,
So while everybody's running around doing mindfulness classes and, oh, we got a new app and entering our points for how many steps we did this week and whatever, um, the real conversations of what do we need to fix here is
yeah,
not being had because we're
yeah,
busy doing other things. And I think you're right. It's, as long as we can put that responsibility on others, then whew, dodge that bullet. We're
yeah.
good for another 2 years. So okay, good.
Exactly, exactly.
But I also think there's a lot of well-being, posturing and signaling going on.
Yeah.
Kind of like ESG. Everybody wants to be seen as green. Now everybody wants to be seen to be doing well-being. So even companies are outdoing each other. When we
Hmm.
see it in all these press releases, they yoga day and whatever, and employees are like, "Oh, okay. I get it." Yeah, and you just kind of wonder, who is this all for? Because
Yeah.
many of the companies who are doing well-being right, you don't hear anything. It's just part of what they do. It's just how they work. It's just who they are. Doesn't need a press release for that.
Exactly, exactly. So okay, so I think we've gone through the study very well.
Hmm.
So that's what doesn't work. So what does work? What should companies be doing instead?
Yeah, I always come back to what are our basic needs, and our basic needs are, good pay, assuming that is there.
Yeah,
And then after that, it's how do you want to be treated? So
yeah.
everybody wants to be seen, everybody
Hmm.
wants to be recognized, everybody wants to hear that what they're doing is good and it's interesting and it's cool and it's adding value, and thank you for being here. It's
Hmm.
really basic stuff
Yeah.
often. So if we think, again, it's just, how do we treat people? How do we
Hmm.
see people? How do
Hmm.
we help people feel like they belong and they matter? And I think that comes down to these little micro actions, as how do we build in well-being
Yeah.
into what we do?
Yes.
That's
In
it.
in the work itself.
In the work itself. And managers are extraordinarily well placed for this, because other studies have been coming out in the past 2-3 years showing that managers are actually responsible or influence 70% of employee well-being.
Yes.
That's more than employees influence themselves.
Hmm.
So if we can get managers right, getting them to understand this is the role you play, this is now part of your job description, and this is how you do it. It's not saying yes to everything. It's not spoiling people. It's just being decent, being nice. You can still have boundaries and say, no, that wasn't cool, but
Hmm.
let's think of ways to do that otherwise. I think, let's start there. That'd be a good place.
That'd be a great place. And then in addition to that, I'm thinking there's a whole like topic of how we organize the work itself.
Yeah.
How many hours do people work? Do they have the tools they need to do a good job?
Yeah.
Do they have the training and support they need to do a good job? Do we have the necessary organization? Or are we continually putting stumbling blocks in front of people trying to do their best, right? Are they working
Yeah.
with antiquated IT systems? I see it in so many places. I went
Mm.
to a hospital to do a workshop there, and I followed the nurses for a morning, and one of them had to give a shot, and she had to register that in three different IT systems
Oh gosh.
and on a piece of paper.
Nice. Just in case the other three failed.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, getting the medication and giving the shot, that was like 5 minutes, and then everything else was 15 minutes. That kind of, and imagine you have to do that every single time. And imagine that you go to your supervisor and you say, "Hey, listen, every time I have to give a shot, I have to do all of this," and they're like, "Yeah, there's nothing we can't fix that. There's nothing we can do."
And
How about that whole side of it? How do we work?
well, and I think that's a great question is, fixing work itself. And I
Hmm.
think managers again can drive some of that. They may not be able to change everything,
Yep.
but asking your team, what's one small thing I could help you with?
Hmm.
We have to input data in three different places. Great. It's on my list. This is now going to be my mission to
Yeah.
help this get fixed. And if it takes me 6 months, that's what I'm going to do. And
Yeah.
that's your new job. It's
Hmm.
be somebody's hero, right?
Yeah.
And then you just work your way down the list. What's the next thing I can help you with? The next thing, the next thing, the next thing.
Hmm.
And often it's these tiny, I don't want to say tiny, but they're things we just eventually give up on and say, okay, I just accept I have to do things in six different ways in five different places. But
Hmm.
that's what annoys people, and that's what
Yeah.
drains people's resources, and that's what makes people angry and upset for no reason.
Yeah.
And all of these things could be avoided. So I think the easiest place is fix work,
Hmm.
be nice about it,
Yeah.
see people, engage with them respectfully, treat them as humans, pay them decently. And then after that, people sort themselves out. People
Yeah.
end up having fun. People end up going the extra mile. All that stuff just kind of comes.
Yeah. What does that kind of an intervention look like? What might something like that be? So it's not about taking the individual and sending him off to a stress management training or something like. What does that look like in practice in a workplace?
Yeah. So I always say if you want to get employee well-being right, ignore your employees and deal with your managers. Just forget about that. They're fine. They'll
I
figure
could
it
not
out.
agree more. That's
Um,
amazing.
but again, it's really engaging with managers. So
Yeah.
there's again all these different micro actions, micro interventions. So things around fixing bad relationships,
Hmm.
having awkward conversations, and saying, I haven't been so good with you. Or we got off on the wrong foot ages ago. How do we fix this? Right.
Yeah.
So helping them have those difficult conversations. Not only fix bad relationships, but improve good relationships to make them even better so that people feel energized and elevated by your presence. So there's stuff around relationships, there's stuff around work barriers. So again, asking people, what's the one small thing, work your way down the list.
Hmm.
Building trust, so psychosocial safety, making it so that people can come to you and say, you know what, I have no idea what I'm doing, or I screwed up really bad. And it's safe for them to be able to say that, and you can
Yeah.
find a solution together.
Yeah.
Versus it's so frightening for people or anxiety provoking that they begin to hide things they do wrong, and that stuff just blows up later and
Yep.
everybody's unhappy. It could also be about modeling well being. So if you're wanting people to take care of themselves, I mean, you can't mandate that, but you can be like, hey, you know what? I'm going vegan this year. So here's what I'm going to start
Yeah.
doing. What about you? Like, what are you guys doing for health? Right. And just
Yeah.
to start, at least start having that conversation and raising it as this is something that belongs at work. So if you were a police officer or a surgeon, we need you to be at your best. And just because you're an office worker, that expectation shouldn't be any different.
Yeah.
So I think there's a number of different categories, and what we really call these are, use a lot of Jane Dutton's work at University of Michigan. She's like my
Hmm.
hero, and she does a lot of work around developing high quality connections. So
Yeah.
essentially, helping managers establish good ties with their teams, to be transparent to the degree that they can, to be empowering and nurturing, to notice, to have a good enough relationship with people so that when something's off, they see it and they
Hmm.
go, oh, that's different. Or, yeah, no, he's always like that. um, and to
Yeah.
be able to respond, to be able to identify people's strengths and leverage that. And job crafting is another one. How do you match people's jobs to their strengths? Not everybody's going to be good at everything, and we keep forcing people to do that, and it's like it doesn't work, and people hate it.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
just go with what they're good at,
Yeah.
and to be effective in dealing with issues, but also positioning themselves to be in a position where they see the issue coming, and they're not just constantly putting out fires all the time.
Yeah.
And so that demands that a manager be human. So hiring well, um, and that a manager has time to be able to sit with people one on one and say, "How's it going? How
Yeah.
can I help you this week? What is your
Yeah.
week looking like? How can the rest of the team help you? Because you have a busy week, but so and so doesn't. Let's pitch in and we can do this together."
Yeah. And that basic level of, like, basic humanity in leaders, I think is yeah, and some leaders have that and some don't.
And some don't, and
Some
some can be
s
helped to get it,
and some cannot.
and some cannot. Okay.
Oh, there are definitely bosses out there who are like, "Yeah, no, that's not my
No,
there there's"
yeah,
yeah. I
unfortunately.
did see a great example of this in practice. There's a company in Denmark called Kalras. They sell tools to professional builders.
Okay.
400 and something employees. And first of all, happiness is they call it their number one tool, which since they sell tools,
Yeah, cute.
yeah, get it, get it, get it.
Yeah, I got it.
Uh,
No pun
and they also
intended.
say that they don't have a single bad manager. And there's like three things they do to make that happen. First of all, they promote all managers from inside the company.
Okay.
So these are people they know well and people who
Mm,
understand the culture and what it takes to work well there. They train their managers really well. They have internal trainings on all of this stuff, like, right.
nice.
And then if there is a manager who's not a good manager, they get rid of that person. Which I think is the flip side of all of this, because again, some people do not have it in them.
Yeah.
They don't have that level of interpersonal relationship skill, and those people need to not be managers, because yeah,
And that also shows a level of accountability of the organization,
yeah,
because work shouldn't hurt, right?
no,
So if your managers aren't great, they're going to hurt people and they're going to undermine productivity and performance.
yeah, they are.
So why are we leaving you in that position? So when organizations make that difficult choice to say, no, you're out, or
Hmm.
we're just going to put you back where you were or in a different position, whatever, but not in contact and not with such a big responsibility, that really shows a commitment to
Yeah,
well-being.
yeah,
And that's leading with well-being in mind.
exactly. Well, that's amazing. That's the kind of thing that works, and ironically, a lot cheaper than sending all your employees on a stress management course or whatever, and so cheaper and way more effective. Any parting thoughts on this whole topic? What works? What does not work?
I think, one of the, just coming back to the study, I think it's not so much, you know, choosing better. I think it's just we need to take a step back here and
Yeah.
say, how do we just make better workplaces so that individual employees don't have to do all the work to be able to fit there? If we just
Yes.
have good workplaces, their well-being will just be guaranteed.
Yes. Yeah. I think it does beg the question, right? What kind of workplace are we running that we constantly have to send our employees on stress management and mindfulness trainings?
Yeah, it's telling right there.
Right? Yeah. I think that's an interesting question in and of itself.
Food for thought.
Beautiful. So this is our attempt to push the conversation in a slightly better direction, and open companies' eyes to the fact that they've been not putting too fine a point on it, wasting all their time and money on the wrong stuff.
I love how you're so direct.
I mean, call a spade, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Awesome. Thanks,
Wonderful.
Louise.
Thank you so much.